Hello, listeners and citizens of Broncos country. My name is Adan Diaz, and I am joined by my co-host at Richie. And welcome to today's exciting episode of Broncos Talk. Richie, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very, very good, my friend. I came in with some extra motivation for today's show. Uh, I'm just feeling excited for what's been going on in it's almost like a free agency kind of swap. I don't know if you want to say swap-a-rama or just going on, as we speak, Rich. There's a lot of stuff going on with players that are going to be free agents who didn't get tagged, whose contracts. I mean, it's a lot of exciting stuff. So hope you guys are ready for a fun packed show. If you're watching us live, please make sure to get your comments and questions in, and Rich and I will try to answer them to the best of our ability as time will allow. And if you're listening to us after the fact, just sit back and enjoy the show, and hopefully we can answer any and all of whatever questions you have. So, Rich, I'd like to start off with the big news coming out of Dove Valley, which is Von Miller coming into Broncos headquarters to not just see, talk to his current teammates and what have you, but there's a lot of speculation saying that he came in to renegotiate his contract with new GM George Payton. What are your thoughts about that?
Until the details come out, you really don't know. For all you know, he's there cleaning out his locker. I joke, but at the same time, we really don't know what's going on there. I'd hope to see him back on some kind of a restructured and extension of sorts. I kind of threw around numbers on Twitter. If you don't follow me, handle down. Hang on, right there. In terms of based on the JJ Watt contract. So I'm thinking his number is probably going to land somewhere around the 16 to 17 million average kind of per year, as it were. That's where I kind of think he's going to end up. Slightly lower than his cap hit was going to be this year at around 22 million. And then I think that the prudent thing to then do is to say, look, we're going to lower it this year by a little bit, like we've seen with all these other teams, but then we're going to move and extend you further out, maybe a year, 2 or 3, and have him potentially retire a Bronco or continue on with the team if he's still playing at a high level at the end of that contract.
Yeah, Rich, I wanted to get your insight first because I wanted to see if maybe you and I were on the same page on the subject. I know usually whenever we start talking about something, I usually yammer off first. So I wanted for a change to kind of see if we're in sync. Does that make sense? And I know sometimes you and I don't see eye to eye on certain things, offensive line and quarterback and what have you. But I think that you and I are pretty much intact in terms of the defense, because I think that not only Von Miller getting cleared of all charges was fantastic news for Broncos country, but it'll really bring in to see just how much of a team player Von really wants to be, because after Super Bowl 50, after they won that, Broncos country was just so worried that Von Miller was going to, go to the highest bidder. But he went on record saying that, he wants to be a Bronco for life. He wants to play with the Broncos. He wants his career to hopefully end as a Bronco and not, anywhere else. So I'm really excited to see what he's willing to do. If the team wants to ask him, which I'm pretty sure they will, to restructure his contract to kind of get some money flowing back into the team so that we can see what Payton and the front office can do in terms of moving money around and seeing who they can get in free agency and whatnot. I think that's a fantastic idea because, like I just mentioned before the start of the show, all these free agents, and I just want to say, just come to Denver to everybody. But unfortunately, we can't sign everybody because that's not how the way football works.
If I can just quickly address a couple things super fast before I kind of get into that. For starters, at 6'10", is there anyone you've ever met that you see eye to eye with? I have to ask. I'm pretty tall for a guy. I'm about 6'2", and even I don't often find people that I see eye to eye with. And you got quite a bit of height extra on me. There's been a few there's been a few comments here I did forewarn the beard was going to likely get trimmed down. It was needed. My wife is quite pleased, and no, it was not Manscaped. Their products are meant for below the belt, not necessarily the face. But back on the Von Miller thing, I would like him to retire a Bronco. And sorry, just one more comment here from Mundungus. Thank you for coming in. Look, with me, you don't have to ever worry about my facial hair. It grows like a bloody weed. So with regards to Vaughn, when you look at what he can do, I think he brings a bunch of leadership to the team and all that sort of stuff as well, which I think is much needed. I think he's a little bit more of a vocal leader. And I also think that with other guys on the team, his accomplishments, you hear a lot of the players when they go on to these sports kind of shows and whatnot, when they speak of players. Even now, Peyton's been retired for like 5, almost 6 years. You still hear players unsolicitedly coming onto these shows and just basically raving about Peyton Manning and his leadership skills, and how when he spoke, you just shut up and listened, right? And I think Vaughn brings that same kind of pedigree, if you will, just because of his performance in the Super Bowl. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I want to kind of touch on something, the very first comment that showed up here from Miguel Santisteban. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, but thank you for coming on and watching the show. He says he's hoping we pick up Butler and Dupree. Now, by Butler, I'm guessing he's maybe saying Malcolm Butler.
Malcolm Butler, yeah.
Okay, and yeah. Bud Dupree. I think Bud Dupree would be a much better addition to this Broncos defense than Malcolm Butler. Malcolm Butler, for me, he's kind of he's had his 15 minutes, and the fact that what happened in that Super Bowl where he was benched, to me, did a lot more damage to his career than help, because it's a mystery to everybody but him and Belichick in terms of, what happened and what he did that, was enough for the coach to bench him and possibly cost New England a Super Bowl title. But if I had to choose out of both of those, I would say Bud Dupree. Now, Bud Dupree is a bit of a worry because he's coming off of a pretty serious injury. So his timetable would be a bit of a concern for me. I'd have to see his injury report and, what his how his progression, if he can come back and be 100% by September.
I like Dupree. Butler was never the fastest cornerback, even when he was with New England. And my concern is, in our division, we have not only speed, but we also have size. And I think Butler might be able to match well against some of the size. I'm very, very concerned with him against, your Nicole Hardmans and Tyreek Hill. We play them twice a year. So that's the thing. It's one thing when you're against kind of bigger receivers or slower receivers, maybe in other divisions, the further north there in Buffalo and in Baltimore, close to where I live, and whatnot. But that's not what you're going to end up with in our division. We have speed, and on the KC Chiefs playing them twice, he's going to get slaughtered. Dupree, though, I would like to bring in on a kind of a 1 year or 2 year, like with the second year being a team option, kind of prove it style contract if he's willing to do something like that. Also dependent on kind of when he can return. And if he can return, come onto our team, basically even starting on IR, I would be open to something like that, because I think he's a player that would at least be worth a flyer, as long as we're not spending, some absolute, crazy number.
Yeah, you know what? And this isn't Broncos related, guys, so don't hate me for saying this, but I did read on Twitter, I believe it was yesterday, that AJ Bouye is trying out for the Raiders. So, and to me, the head scratcher for that one was they just cut LaMarcus Joyner. So that to me, I mean, obviously, I don't think they both play the exact same position. I think Joyner is a safety. Am I correct? I think he's a safety, but they play in the. And I'm sorry.
I think he's cornerback.
Oh, cornerback. Okay, I might be mistaken.
Yeah.
But either way, in any case, I think that Joyner is a better player than Bouye was. So the fact that Bouye is going to go and play, possibly get a job with the Raiders, and LaMarcus Joyner hitting free agency after the Raiders declined his option is pretty interesting to me, and he could be a pretty interesting addition to a Broncos defense. I would say.
Who, Joyner?
Yeah, I mean not top priority, obviously, but I'd like to see what he can do in a Vic Fangio defense. But then again, I'd like to see what any cornerback can do in a Vic Fangio defense.
Well, the one thing I will say is, if there is a coaching staff that can resurrect a career, I think it's Vic Fangio and his coaching staff. They have a specialty in the defensive back room. That's their bread and butter. That's their jam, which is also one of the reasons why, for me, when I hear all this draft talk and all that kind of stuff, I'm less high on taking a cornerback as high as some other people are, because I have far more confidence in our defensive coaching staff and their ability to take undrafted free agents or even mid-round players and maximizing their abilities. I mean, we saw an undrafted free agent go from an undrafted free agent to a starter on our team in Asang Bassi, right? And hey Mo, and then we end up with Motley starting near the end of the season for us too. And it's not like they were not looking good. It's not like you looked at them and said, well, we got to get rid of them next year. It was like, wow, they did pretty well, and they were starting to show. And this is you want to hear a real controversial thing. Here's this: Asang Bassi was playing the way that I expected Drew Lock to play, which is I saw more good than bad, and every week I started to see modest steps forward. Right? That's what I expected to see from Drew Lock when he came into the season. Don't get me wrong, he had his issues and he had some problems and stuff like that, but he had more good than bad, and every week you started to see him progressively get a little bit better, and he was playing his position physically, which is the way that Fangio wants his cornerbacks to play, which is important. It's also one of the reasons why Bosby did not do particularly well, because he whiffed on all those tackles.
Well, you know what? Before we get to Albert Knopper's question, let me just say that Asang Bassi was pretty much put on a pedestal in training camp, and to me, he was almost being projected as maybe the next Chris Harris Jr. in terms of undrafted, and he's going to come in and revolutionize. Well, maybe not revolutionize, but kind of just take over, and wow everybody. But unfortunately, like you said, his play wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't terrible either. So, and as a rookie, you expect something like that from a guy like that. But let's go to Albert Knoppers, who has a good question. And he, thanks for watching the show. He says, if budget would not be a topic, who would you sign as a free agent? Now, that's a very interesting question, Rich, because this is something I was going to try to see if we had time to talk to towards the end of the show. But, obviously one of the bigger free agent signings that happened yesterday was Dakota Prescott signing a really big contract with Dallas Cowboys. Now, Prescott to me was not the Messiah or the answer as Deshaun Watson is being praised in terms of if Denver were to go get him. But if they pursued somebody like Dak and they were able to get something like that, I'd like the Broncos' chances in terms of getting not just getting into the postseason, but making a Super Bowl run. Do I like it better than Deshaun Watson? No. I think Deshaun Watson in Denver would push this team a whole lot farther than just a regular playoff win. Now, could that be a Super Bowl? I honestly can't say, because I don't know what Denver would have to give up in terms of picks and maybe even players, offensive players, not defense. So while that idea is still hanging up in the air until we get to see what Houston's going to do with Deshaun Watson, I would probably say I was going to say Patrick Peterson, but Patrick Peterson's age kind of worries me. So come back to me. Let me think about it. Do you have anybody?
Patrick Peterson would only interest me if he started to do what was it Rod Woodson did at the end of his career, where he went from cornerback into safety.
Oh.
So I would be very interested actually in Patrick Peterson if he was willing to come in here on a, kind of like 11-ish million a year, 10 million a year kind of contract, giver somewhere in that range, to play the safety position. I think he would be an interesting addition there. Maybe even to replace a bit of a Kareem Jackson style role, because I think Patrick Peterson still has some speed that he could leverage at the safety position. Also, being a former cornerback, he'd be able to. Sorry, Charles Woodson. You're right, Charles Woodson. I just saw Rod Woodson's name 10 minutes, I think, before the pod started or something like that. So it kind of stuck in my mind. And so Charles Woodson really kind of made that transition really well. I think Patrick Peterson might be able, if he was willing to make that transition, do a pretty good job there. He would be, I think, someone that would be really interesting in that type of role, having played cornerback and being able to maybe play some spots, in certain packages or certain situations, fill in if he needed to. He would be one person that would be quite interesting. I was trying to do some digging before the show on interior defensive linemen. Wasn't able to get as much information on them as possible as I would like. I would like us to target, my preference is to go after some form of rushing interior defensive lineman to pair alongside or to sub in place of even Mike Purcell. I think Purcell is a wonderful and great run stopper. He also seems to be a fantastic person just on and off the field. But I think we need that pressure straight up the middle. And I think having someone to play majority of the snaps in that kind of interior position would be important. There's a few names that I've seen kind of tossed around that I'm still looking into. One of them I just saw was recently tendered, Williams. That's unfortunate because he was one of the ones I was looking into. And then I've seen a couple others that I want to dig into a little bit more. But I think an interior defensive lineman would be the splash move that I would say that we should be making, particularly because this year's draft and interior defensive lineman is not spectacular.
Yeah, you know what? And I don't know if he's going to be a part of the cap casualty, as they're calling it. But I would probably say Marshawn Lattimore would be my choice if he were to hit free agency and not be able to.
He just restructured, I think.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't read that, but I was getting ready to say if he hit the free agent market, Lattimore would be my. It would more than likely be either a cornerback or maybe even a safety, depending on what who's out there and what I would do with Kareem Jackson, because I don't think Kareem Jackson put enough tape to save his job at the moment. So I think his spot is much in jeopardy if the free agency pool in terms of safety keeps opening up the closer we get to the start of the new year, which is a week from tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, the 17th. So I would either say cornerback or safety.
Sorry, Rankins would be the interior defensive lineman I like.
Rankins. He plays for the Saints. Okay. Yeah, close. But if you want somebody to play behind a defensive tackle, Rich, you could save some money instead of going to free agency. You could draft and put a draft prospect behind Mike Purcell, because I'm trying to think. Probably one of those things that if you sign a free agent defensive tackle is with the instinction that guy would have to either play behind Mike Purcell or rotate with Mike Purcell, so he doesn't just sit and ride the bench or have to wait until should Mike Purcell get hurt. And then, you bring in another defensive tackle, which is exactly what happened last season when Purcell did get hurt.
Yeah, I envision it more of like Rankins, for example, would be on the field more often than not, and then Purcell would kind of rotate in on obvious rundowns or what have you, something to that effect. That way, you end up with a bit of a spelling in terms of keeping Rankins or someone like him, not healthy, but rested, and then you bring in a guy like Purcell to kind of do what he does best, and that's kind of like plug the holes and stop the run.
Mr. Boggins with a very good point, and I totally forgot about this young man. He says McTelvin Agim, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his last name, should have a good push in his second year. And I totally forgot about that player. But Boggins brings up a very good point because I think that while a free agent signing of a defensive tackle is really good, you could the coaching staff could use that as motivation for Purcell and maybe even coach an up and comer like Ajim in terms of this is how you can improve yourself and be better at your positions. Kind of like what we were talking about with the quarterback. If the Broncos were to go get a veteran quarterback, how if they had some type of mentorship that they can implore on Drew Lock, if Drew Lock is even still the quarterback by the start of the season, kind of like a mentorship type of thing. But Albert Knopper also adds, Kareem had also many issues with speed people. I'm guessing he means in terms of Kareem getting beat by speedy wide receivers when he was in Houston. And that's actually kind of true. But at the same time, I've seen Bradley Roby getting beat by speed wide receivers in Houston. So that seems to be a running theme down in Houston.
Yeah, but again, the issue there is, it all comes back to who we're playing against. Like, we need to beat those in our division really first if we'd like to even have a shot, right? And we need to be able to keep up with some of the faster guys that are coming into our division. Ruggs is in our division now with the Las Vegas Raiders. And then we have the two speedsters that are on the KC Chiefs in Hill and Hardman. So, if you have a defensive back who's got a glaring deficiency in keeping up with speed, I'd say you're in for some long Sunday evenings, right?
Right. But, going back to our initial conversation about Von Miller, I think that if he can come back and be just the Von Miller that we were so hyped up of seeing last season, that is going to be such a rejuvenation shot into this defense. Now, obviously, he won't be as the fast Von Miller that we've grown to love. Every defensive player over time, Father Time catches up to them and everything. But like we keep saying on this podcast, it's Von Miller's leadership and his sharp wit and his mind that is irreplaceable. And we sorely missed that out on the field last season. And when him and Bradley Chubb can get, their mojos coming together and they confuse offensive lines as to who they want to double team, I mean, that defense is scary, man.
Yeah, that's why you need someone up the middle as well, because then it forces the opposing offensive line to have to try and cover the one-on-ones. It forces it. You can still lean or chip on the outsides with running back, tight end, whatever, to kind of help mitigate some of that initial outside rush. And it's always like the outside it's the longest path to get to the quarterback. So some of the schemes, quick dump offs and that kind of stuff can help mitigate some of that stuff sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes. But that's the problem that I have is I love the outside rush, but I think that the interior rush from both the defensive ends and the DT is where we really need to focus on, because then it'll make the outside linebackers better.
Yeah, I think that our first priority, well, maybe not first, but a priority for the Broncos is re-signing Shelby Harris and not letting him test free agency again, because
agree.
if that tactic for Denver is not going to work this time around. If Shelby Harris puts 1 foot out in free agency, he's going to get a job somewhere. They might lowball him because obviously there wasn't a pandemic when he tried last season, but he's still going to, I would say he's still going to make a lot more money than if he played in Denver, just for the simple fact of the tape that he put out on the field last season, you know, and even coming back after being out, what was it, 2-3 weeks with COVID, there wasn't no loss in his step. You know, he didn't come in and, you know, he wasn't a bad team player, even though the team itself wasn't in a very good position, you know, stat wise. He came in to do what he does best. And that's, you know, bad passes down, man.
Right. I just think from a cap situation is going to be a pretty tough one for us, because the team has already shown that they want to try and bring Simmons back. Simmons is going to try to command a pretty substantive salary, certainly near the top or at the top of the market. And we have some other kind of holes to plug and fill. So it's going to be pretty tough to bring Shelby back at the price, A, that he wants, and B, at a price that he probably feels, and his agent probably feels, that he can do better outside of Denver. So whether or not that extra plane ride to get back to see his kid is a tipping point for him, the birth of his, you know, maybe, hopefully, but I doubt it. I think at the end of the day, he's going to be looking at this as an opportunity, as he should, rightfully so, to make as much money as he possibly can in this short initial time frame here for his newborn. And I don't blame him in the slightest, and I wish him the absolute best of luck. I do hope he's back in Denver, preferably, but I think it's more likely than not he's gone.
Yeah, Mr. Boggins shares your sentiment too. He says he highly doubts that Shelby is back. And that's an interesting point that you brought up about the structuring of Justin Simmons' contract, where if he does get that big mega contract that he's been asking for since, I want to say, last season, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. I think he does deserve every penny of that. But at the same time, that's going to put a lot more strain as to, you know, who else they want to keep. And obviously they're not going to want to, but they're not going to be able to pay everybody, you know, top dollar, because they're trying to, you know, save some pennies for free agency and try to get some pretty good players out on there. So I do agree that if they go all out and they give Justin Simmons his big contract, that we could have seen Shelby Harris play his last game as a Bronco. Now, he could always, you know, restructure and say, hey, look, I love it here. I want to stay here. I want to try to win a title here, and, you know, take a team-friendly contract. That would be great. But that's a decision that would, like you said, it would have to come from him and his agent.
Yeah, I just think with a young family and the fact that he is not getting younger at this point, which, I mean, I think some defensive linemen can play a little later into their careers than maybe some other positions that require on sheer speed. I just don't see him wanting to take a team-friendly deal given his path to get to where he is right now. He's also a relatively unique story in the fact that he kind of didn't have that straight trajectory to the position where he's in now. He slowly built up to get to the position that he is now. And he personally worked to get there, which I have a lot of respect for, the route that he took to get to where he's at. The problem, though, is that because he didn't do it, we'll say, quicker, it put a hindrance on his earning potential. And I think that's why you're going to see him wanting to get more money right away.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, I don't really know the names off the top of my head in terms of free agent defensive tackles, but I'm pretty sure by the time we get closer to next week's show, and hell, even by the time it starts, that there'll be more names on the list. Oh, yeah. And it'll just be more competition for it. And that also, Denver could also use that to their advantage, though, Rich, if you think about it, because if there's big name tackles, defensive tackles out there, then who knows? It might be Shelby Harris trying to, spin the wheel and hope that somebody calls his name. And, in a streak of luck, it could be that he gets no team calls, and then he comes back and he takes a team-friendly deal. So, I mean, anything can happen in free agency. And especially with a bit of with the pandemic still going on, and teams being quote unquote cap strapped or whatever. So the fact that some teams are just gonna have to make some like really crazy and important decisions, one team's quote unquote trash could be another team's quote unquote treasure.
Right. Go ahead.
Now that brings up Kareem Jackson. I know we talked about him a little bit during the show. Do you feel that Kareem Jackson, if he were, let's say, hypothetically, be able to bring Deshaun Watson to Denver, do you think that would be enough to save his job?
Not without a restructure. I mean, that actually, in and of itself, may actually be the push out the door almost, because of almost what Boggins brought up there with regards to Shelby Harris and just saying it's unlikely he's going to be back. I assume it's probably for similar reasons to what I said in terms of wanting to seek out a more appropriate contract in terms of dollar value for what he believes he's worth.
Right.
Deshaun Watson brings with him, yes, he's reasonably priced this year, but next year his cap dollars are going to go up, right? So I could absolutely see the balancing act in the cap space and stuff being a real issue where the Broncos will want to try and keep some of that money back. So I could see Fangio, because I know he likes Jackson, I could see him restructuring. I could see him looking to Kareem and say, look, let's pull a Von Miller here almost in a certain respect, and let's try to bump you out a little further, bring your cap number way down. That being said, though, I could actually see the Broncos just parting ways outright, and I'm not sure I would necessarily be all that disappointed.
Stuart Macios, loyal fan of the show. Thank you so much for watching, my friend. He says, bad year to be a free agent and looking for big money with the salary cap lowering. Now, this is a very, very, very good comment here, Richie. And the reason is because as we talked about earlier about Dak Prescott getting his big name contract, that cause is going to affect somebody on that team not getting theirs. And the word on the football field is that Amari Cooper could be that cap casualty, because CeeDee Lamb he's going into second year, so he's still young, and they do have something with Michael Gallup in terms of offensive power there. So the fact that they would have to cut ties with Amari Cooper, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know what his current contract is, but I believe the Cowboys were only on the hook for one of those years because they traded a pick for him in 2018, I believe it was.
They extended him, though.
Oh, that's right. They extended him. Thank you.
He signed a new contract. I think it was even last offseason.
Yeah. I believe you're. I totally forgot about that. But Boggins brings up a good point. He says he thinks that Gallup is a free agent. I could have sworn that Gallup was still in Dallas, because I had heard that Amari Cooper was going to be a cap casualty. Then that's what got me thinking. I'm like, okay, well, at least they still got Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, and I don't know, maybe they could get a good to decent wide receiver in free agency if they have a couple $100 left or so. But that just goes to show you just how important this free agency period is going to be, and just how much, hopefully not like a lot of stress and pressure is put on our GM in terms of him trying to go out there and, impress the fans and get, a big name signing that just comes to Denver and it doesn't work out, So, and unfortunately, as Broncos fans, we've kind of been a tad bit used to that, the last one being Jawan James, and hopefully he can come in and play some football this season. But I think that Peyton just needs to, tread carefully and, just pick his fights wisely.
Gallup is from the 2018 draft, so his free agency is next season. I pulled up an article here. Apparently, he'll be a free agent in 2022. So the word on the street, according to this article, is he's paying very close attention to free agency for wide receivers this year. Apparently,
Yeah.
it is almost looking like he's expecting that he may actually no longer be with the Cowboys, but his free agency is next year, not this year.
Right.
Which goes well for the Cowboys, simply because they just signed Dak, right? So having him still on that rookie contract is helpful.
Same thing with CeeDee Lamb.
Right, same with CeeDee Lamb. And CeeDee Lamb and Gallup, I actually like both CeeDee Lamb and Gallup actually a little bit better than I like Amari Cooper. I think Cooper has run some really crisp routes and all that kind of stuff, but he seems to, in those moments when you want him to be there and that kind of stuff, he seems to not step up. And that's with regards to Amari Cooper there. So I could actually see the Cowboys looking to try and just offload him to a wide receiver needy team, or a team that has a lot of cap space and a rookie quarterback.
A Wookiee quarterback. I mean,
again, I was looking at these Star Wars T-shirts and stuff with the Wookiees on it. Oh, they're great.
Hey, I've never seen Chewbacca throw a football, but I sure wouldn't mind seeing him try.
Oh, wouldn't that be a great sound though in the middle of a game?
You know what? And we thought that my good friend Creasy was the one with the Freudian slips, but that I'm pretty sure Boggins is going to start that trend on Twitter by the time this show is over. But Mark Langley, loyal fan of the show, thank you for watching and joining us, my friend. He says, "What do you guys think of KJ Costello in mid-round for the Broncos?" Now, I'm guessing he's talking about the draft. So I'm not a big draft guy, Mark. I'm not going to lie to you. So I don't know who Costello is. Rich, do you have any?
I don't dig into that stuff until further in. I look at a few key people that I'm particularly interested in at key positions, and then I kind of dig into those positions a little bit more. But when it starts getting into deeper and further down in, I don't start going into that stuff until quite a bit later. And then this year, I actually expected what we're seeing now, which is basically an exodus from teams. So, I think you and I were talking about this weeks and weeks ago, where I was bringing up saying, free agency is going to be I think, madness, because you're going to have players get cut that you didn't expect to get cut. You're going to have even when teams are going to go out into free agency, like, for example, I think the Broncos, what they might do with Kareem Jackson, which you could argue might be a dirty move, but I could totally see them doing it maybe, is going out and grabbing another safety in free agency. And until we get our guy in free agency, keep Kareem on the team and then cut him.
Oh, before OTAs or after OTAs, I mean, yeah.
Right. And I think that all depends on how his contract is structured and stuff like that. But there's certain players in certain positions that you don't want to be without. But at the same time, you'd be willing to take a slight extra dead cap hit this year to guarantee that you have the person and people on your roster to fill that out. So I could absolutely see the Broncos doing something like that with a few key positions, safety or cornerback, or even some of the running backs. Like they might even hold on to Melvin Gordon if they're targeting a couple free agent running backs, and then say, well, guess what? That DUI thing you're in the court cases for, well, that voids, this, and this. Oh, and by the way, the door's that way. I could see stuff like that happening too.
Yeah, well, Aaron Jones is hitting free agency because he didn't get franchise tag today. So he's going to be commanding a pretty hefty contract. Excuse me. But I don't know if it's something that Denver can pay even if they cut Melvin Gordon per se, because I don't see Aaron Jones as an $8 million running back. But I could be wrong. And I'm pretty sure he's going to fetch a big name contract somewhere else. But
I think he's going to have a hard time.
Well, I think that what he did with the Packers is good enough to get him a really good contract. And Boggins, he's our inside reporter. He says, word on the street is Packers are trying to sign him before he hits free agency. And that would be a pretty smart thing for the Packers, because I can't remember the name of the second running back for the Packers, but he played a pretty decent role while Aaron Jones was out. So, but he wasn't as good as Jones was, but he wasn't too shabby in that regard.
He has awesome glasses too.
Yeah.
those are fantastic.
Glenn Hauser adds, he says, Aaron Jones wants way too much. He was trash in the playoff loss. I can't argue with you there, Glenn. I mean, he kind of disappeared in that game against the Bucs, but the Bucs defense, I mean, even without Vita Vea on that front line, they were just, man, they were getting home, man. They were getting to Rodgers. They were covering they were doing their job. So I don't even know that even if Aaron Jones, with his best A game, with the offensive line just not being able to open up those holes, that he would have been any more effective otherwise.
Well, I also I think the Packers in that game were missing one of their
Bakhtiari was out.
Right. So I mean, that's a pretty key position in a pretty critical game to miss some of them. And it's not like it's not even like he was like the fourth best player on the offensive line. Like he's basically their best offensive lineman. So, that's a big deal to be missing someone like that.
Miguel Santisteban, I'll get your last name right, I swear. He has a very good comment, and he says, I understand wanting to get paid, but don't understand making it to where it's not beneficial to the team. Now, this is actually a very good comment here we have, Rich, because it reminds me of a quote, or not a quote. It almost sounds like a joke, but I heard Shannon Sharp telling Skip Bayless on Undisputed a couple of weeks ago, where he says, Super Bowl rings don't pay the bills. So for some players like Tom Brady, it's all about the glory. It's all about the rings. It's all about the records, because Tom Brady, he's not getting paid, millions and millions of dollars like your Russell Wilsons, your Matt Staffords, your Jared Goffs, your Carson Wentz's. Those guys are making millions and millions of dollars. So, and on the other hand, some players they're just trying to, I mean, they live lavish lifestyles. I mean, let's be real. They have fancy cars and big houses, and some even have advertisements and sportsman deals and all that. And all of that stuff is not cheap. It costs money to run all those things. So for some players, they'll go and play for any team as long as that team is willing to shell out a ton of money to say, we'll pay you X amount of money, but we want you to come in. And for some teams, they make that leap where they have paid, or they have players that they're paying a lot of money for. And unfortunately, those players are not playing up to what they're being paid to play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but you also have to look at it from the flip side. So there's a limited number of teams that you can play for in the NFL, and you have a very, very limited lifespan in the NFL by which to make your income, the goal of which is to set you and your family up for long-term success. Because you don't see a bunch of these NFL players, skipping around when they're older. I mean, this game is extremely violent and extremely hard on your body. I mean, even when you look at Elway now, I mean, he's hunched over and not walking real straight. And you have to imagine Elway has access to some pretty substantial, like some legit doctors to make him, be better, right? And
right.
So I mean, these guys are looking to get paid, so they're wanting money.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're wanting to get that money right now. And so I could absolutely appreciate how these players are wanting their contract here and now. And to that end, Shannon Sharp also said the other part of that quote, which by the way I am familiar with it. The other part of that quote is this, which is to say, the salary cap is not my problem. That's the general manager's problem. So the GM and the team and the owner all signed off on that paycheck. So it's up to that team to then figure out how to make the team competitive. It's not my job as a player to help make the team competitive. That's your job as an owner and as an owner, a coach, and a GM.
That's actually very true, Rich, and I'm glad you said that because I totally forgot about that part. But now that you mention it, I play that whole clip in my head. So, and that's actually very true. And for some players, like let's take Von Miller for example. Von is just more than a really high priced player. He brings, like we keep saying, he brings that leadership. He brings that enthusiasm. You know, people in Denver love Von Miller. He brings so much more to the table, not just on the field. You know, so it does. And actually, I want to go back to this comment that Mr. Bogus says. He says, you do get a bonus for winning the Super Bowl. So technically, that paid my bills for quite a while. And I don't think I have to go out and say this for the record, Rich. That bonus that Tom Brady gets would pay almost everybody in this chat's bills, as well as yours and as well as mine.
Well, you keep on saying that Brady's taking kind of a little less, but yeah, he's getting a little less, and he's got however many local ads wherever he is. In addition to that, he's bringing his TB12 method with him, which is a second business. And then the other piece that Shannon has actually brought up a few times, and others as well, which is it also helps when your wife is actually making more money than you and you're an NFL quarterback. So I think you can count the number of players that are in the NFL that are in that position with one finger, and that is Tom Brady. So like, there's not many other NFL players who their spouse has a net worth that is larger than theirs.
Yeah, that's actually very true. I mean, you see it on social media. It's sometimes it's not even their wives. It's like their girlfriends or their fiancés. Some of them are supermodels, or they're just really, really beautiful women. But none of them have had a career like Giselle has had in terms of, you know, being a supermodel and everything that she's done in the fashion world. So the fact that she brings home the bigger bacon in terms of money on the table, and Tom Brady brings home the hardware, you know, and this is kind of going off topic, but that reminds me of a lyric that I heard from one of my favorite artists, Will Smith. He basically, when he talks to, in that lyric, he says when he talks to his family, he doesn't ask them what they learned today. He wants to know what they earned today. So, you know, to me, that's a pretty dope. It was a really good bar, because, you know, Will Smith, he's made a lot of money over the years. So the fact that, you know, he's married to a really famous actress, and his kids are, some of them are actors, and they're in the music business or whatever. So, but that's never stopped Tom Brady, you know, because after that Super Bowl that he just won in Tampa, it's been known that Giselle asked him, like, or told him maybe that you should just retire. What else is there for you to prove? And, you know, Tom Brady just had, I believe, knee surgery, and he's already looking to come back and practice and get on the field for next year.
But that's the thing, is someone who is well, let's put it this way. I don't think Giselle has fully thought through what she's asking for. When you have someone who is of that mindset, like he'll be around the house and he'll say, you know, she'll be like, "Oh, we need to do this," and he'll be like, "I'm gonna win." Right? That's not someone who is wired like Tom Brady just doesn't flip that switch off. It is a hardwired mentality for that particular individual.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good family friend. He was CEO of a company, and he retired, and he was home for 6 months, and his wife said, "Go back to work. I don't want you around here." Because he, you know, certain people in certain positions, the way that they're wired is they're wired to just kind of work towards a goal and win, right? And people that are wired that way, successful business people are often wired that way. Successful athletes are often wired that way. It is a honed skill that they have had to master in order to get to where they got to. That is not a switch that turns off. That is a one-way switch on. and they will be like that for now until forever.
Right.
You need to work through it, and most of those people will literally work until they can't.
And that's actually very true, Rich. And as we're winding down almost to the end of our show, Rich, I thought we'd kind of circle back to what I kind of talked about at the beginning of the show, and that's about the big news about Dak Prescott, and kind of give Broncos country yours and mine's thoughts about the big signing and what that means for the Cowboys. Now, and actually what it can be shown to other teams around the league. And I think that the fact that the Cowboys finally caved in and paid Dak Prescott a lot of money to stay and be their quarterback made them pretty much the top dog in that seed, because the Eagles are in shambles. The Washington football team, their defense is really, really good, but they don't have anybody at quarterback. And until we find out who's at quarterback and what their offensive line is looking like, we won't have a pretty good idea of what they'll be bringing back as division champs. And then the Giants are being kind of seen as a bit of a sleeper in terms of Daniel Jones kind of coming back in his third year, and he's supposed to have just this fantastic year where they're going to take the league by storm, and kind of what Drew Lock was supposed to have last year. That's the hype that's behind Daniel Jones, and obviously they're getting Saquon Barkley back from injury. So with that being said, Rich, while I do think the Cowboys could retake their division, I don't think that they're there yet in terms of them going off and, beating other tough NFC teams, let alone getting to a Super Bowl, because the coaching is still really, really up in the air in terms of what Dan Quinn brings back to Dallas in terms of a defense, what the Cowboys can afford to spend in free agency to help improve said defense now that we know where all their money is. So until we get a better idea of that, I don't see the Cowboys going to a Super Bowl next season. I'm not saying they're not going at all, but while Dak is a really good quarterback, and the Cowboys, I think that they made a really good choice in investing in their quarterback, I don't think that it was enough to say we're going to the Super Bowl next year.
I don't even know where to start on this. Like, I it's almost like I go back to like when I was a kid and my mom and dad said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. I'll try to be nicer. How's that? Okay, so when Dak was throwing up basically Madden stats last year, the Cowboys were still losing. They lost their division. Yes, Dak got hurt, so I will give them that. But all Dak has now done is take an absolute enormous portion of a shrinking salary cap on a team that has an offensive line that has regressed, a running back who has shown that without a top offensive line, he cannot produce at the level that he did unless he has a bounce back year. But at the same time, he's had 2 seasons to really have a bounce back year, and he hasn't really done it yet. So I think he's always going to be better than average, but he's never going to be back to where he was unless he's behind that top kind of tier offensive line that he can start his real burst against a linebacker rather than start to try to push through a defensive, anyone on the defensive line. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the back end of the Cowboys defense, I mean, there's talks of Awuzie not being there now as a result of free agency and whatnot. And I mean, the Cowboys already had almost no secondary, and he's gone potentially. Who else is there? I mean, Boggins, do you play cornerback? Because the Cowboys need someone. So like they're that bad, and I just don't see the Cowboys being able to overcome. The Cowboys are almost in as bad of a situation as the Broncos are. At least we can all agree that at least Dak Prescott is a above average quarterback. So we can at least kind of start there, but he was not raising everybody else around him. He was not putting up enough points to beat the other team. He was not changing the game like you saw guys like Peyton Manning and even Tom Brady do when he was in New England, Those guys elevated the other players around them and made people want to play better, and they did because of them. There are so few players in the league that are like them, so I hate trying to compare, players to them and to that caliber of player. But you just earned 40 some odd $1 million a year. We see a player like that who is at a similar caliber in Patrick Mahomes. He's making those other players want to try and play to that level and play like that. I just don't see Dak as that caliber of a player, and yet he's being paid like one.
Yeah. I mean, it might not be a big of a strain on the Cowboys now, but if they can get, their players intact and basically kind of go all chips in for what they're trying to do. And, Jerry Jones, he loves to negotiate with his players. He loves that tension. He loves to create that controversy, and when I think about it, like, for Denver's sake, I agree, Boggins. He's the new. He could be the new Romo, and Boggins and I have kind of gone back and forth about this, and at times he's actually dropped the mic on me in terms of Deshaun Watson coming to Denver, and it's been said that a lot of people don't want Denver to quote unquote bet the farm in terms of giving up draft picks, giving up players for Deshaun Watson. Now, and I'll say this again for the record, I don't have anything against Deshaun Watson. I see the numbers that he's put up last season on a 4-12 team. He did fantastic. It's amazing. But I don't have, at this point, I don't really like the whole giving up the farm thing or whatever. It's like, I'm starting to come around in terms of like draft picks will be draft picks and whatever. Players, it depends on what players you're giving up to bring in Deshaun Watson. And while I'm a big Drew Lock fanatic, I don't see Drew Lock in terms of coming around and by what I mean by that is by me saying like, yeah, Drew Lock's going to turn around and he's going to take us to a Super Bowl next season. He's going to fix his accuracy mistakes. He's going to learn how to read it even. He's going to fix all of his mistakes in one season, and that's not going to happen. With Deshaun Watson coming in if he were to come into Denver, and it's just like, yeah, he'll be a great upgrade. He'll be contending up there with the Mahomes and the Derek Carrs and the up and coming quarterback whose name I can't think of with the Chargers.
Herbert,
thank you. But it's at the same time, it's like I just don't know if Deshaun Watson is that quarterback that you can say, yeah, he's going to go and win us a Super Bowl.
See, here's the deal, right? So first off, I tried to kind of balance things out in my comment. I cannot put Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson in the same category. In fact, Dak Prescott is 2, maybe even 3 tiers down from Deshaun Watson. It is not fair to put them in the same categories. Deshaun Watson was a top 3 statistic quarterback last year and has been a top tier quarterback almost since the day he entered the league, with a team that has been statistically awful on the defensive side of the ball and in other elements, plus with a head coach that was absolutely useless since he entered the league. So he's been the reason why they have done well, which I can argue is the exact opposite to say a player like Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, for the first portion of his career when he was actually doing halfway decent, had probably the number 1 or arguably the number 1 offensive line in the league in front of him. He had arguably the best running back in the league that was in the backfield with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he had 1 or 2 reasonably decent weapons at wide receiver. Dak Prescott had that many excuses to not do well, and he did fairly well. Then, as other players started to come in and other players needed to get paid, and those other players along the line and everything started to age, Dak Prescott, what the Cowboys were hoping for was Dak Prescott would progress to then kind of overcome and then be the reason rather than be one of the cogs in kind of the machine, and he hasn't been able to do so.
Yeah. And as much as I'd like to keep getting into this subject, Rich, unfortunately, we are out of time. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap things up here. Guys, thank you so much for joining Rich and I. We hope we were able to get to all of your burning comments and questions on today's show. And as always, you can follow the show at MHRT Podcast. We are on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. You can see our links down there at the bottom of the screen if you're watching this live. Or if you want to follow Rich and I independently, you can see our Twitter handles there. But just, I'm going to say for the record, my Twitter handle is at @6FT10 Mexican, a 6'10" Mexican altogether. My co-host is at RICHIRICHEH. You can follow each one of us on Twitter. You can ask us questions about the Broncos, anything that we may have missed on today's show. Or you could just, just follow us and tag along. So for all of you audio listeners, we do hope you've been enjoying what the product that Richie and I have been bringing you once a week, every single Tuesday. And hopefully you'll be able to come and join us live stream so you can be a part of the fun. Richie, anything to add before we sign off?
I'm actually quite interested in the next week or two to see what moves our general manager makes. I think we're going to potentially see Boggins. He can't be a good quarterback. There's been no quarterback that's been good that's been over 6'6". He's toast. You should know that. Come on now. I'm just very curious to see what our general manager does. I think there might be some moves internally on the team that, as a fan base, we're going to be quite interested to see happen. Vaughn, Justin Simmons, those types of things. And then on the flip side, it's going to be very interesting to see, just from a team building perspective, what moves he makes of acquiring players and what types of players he wants to acquire. That'll be very telling in terms of what type of team he would like to build.
Very well said, my friend, and I can't second that. But going back, I forgot to mention, if you're listening to us on Anchor and you want to be a monthly supporter, Richie and I would really appreciate it if you want to be a supporter for the listener support. And with that being said, Rich, you have a very good week. Oh, and I almost forgot, a personal shout out to my friend Shannon. Thank you so much for being a supporter of this show. I told her I'd give her a shout out. So with that being said, for my co-host Richie Rich, my name's Adan Diaz. This has been Broncos Talk. Thank you so much. Mile high salute to everybody. Have a good night, guys.